I had never thought much about homeowner associations until I moved into Maple Ridge, a quiet suburban neighborhood that promised peace and a close-knit community. It seemed idyllic, rows of manicured lawns, white picket fences, and friendly nods from neighbors on morning jogs. But the surface calm concealed an undercurrent of control and manipulation, embodied in the figure of Karen, the president of the local homeowner association. Karen was a force to be reckoned with. She had a penchant for dramatic displays of authority, usually at the expense of unsuspecting residents. Her rules were rigid and her punishments swift. But as a newcomer, I didn't realize how far she'd go to enforce her vision of the neighborhood. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter taped to my front door. The envelope bore the unmistakable emblem of the homeowner association. Inside, a tersely worded notice informed me that my backyard pool, which had been installed by the previous owner, was in violation of community aesthetic standards. I had 30 days to remove it or face a $5,000 fine. I couldn't believe it. The pool was pristine, professionally built, and had been there for years. I called the homeowner association office, hoping for clarification. Instead, I was greeted with Karen's frosty voice. "This isn't personal, Alex," she said with a tone that dripped with condescension. "We're simply enforcing the rules. You should have reviewed them before moving in." "But the pool predates my ownership," I protested. "Surely there's some sort of grandfather clause." Karen's laugh was cold. "Rules are rules. I suggest you comply." And with that, she hung up. Over the next few weeks, I learned that Karen's reputation was well-deserved. She had alienated countless neighbors with her authoritarian tactics. She'd fined families for hosting birthday parties deemed too loud, issued warnings over unapproved garden gnomes, and even spearheaded a campaign to have a family's RV towed from their driveway. But no one seemed willing to stand up to her. The fear of retaliation was too great. I, however, wasn't going to back down. I began researching the homeowner association's bylaws, combing through every clause and amendment. My findings were infuriating. Karen was exploiting ambiguities in the rules to impose her personal preferences. The bylaws made no mention of pools being prohibited. Armed with this information, I confronted Karen at the next homeowner association meeting. The room was packed, and I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on me as I walked to the podium. "I've reviewed the bylaws," I began, holding up a printed copy for emphasis. "There's nothing that prohibits pools like mine. Karen's demands are baseless." Karen's face darkened. "The bylaws are subject to interpretation," she snapped. "And as president, I have the authority to enforce community standards." "Authority doesn't mean you can make up rules as you go," I shot back, my voice rising. "This is my property, and I have rights." The room erupted in murmurs. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, emboldened by my defiance. Others looked nervously at Karen, as if waiting for her to retaliate. She glared at me, her eyes narrowing with barely concealed rage. "You'll regret this," she hissed as I left the podium. True to her word, Karen wasted no time making my life miserable. The very next morning, I woke to find a notice taped to my mailbox, informing me of additional fines for landscaping violations. According to Karen, the flower bed in my front yard was not community approved. As I read the notice, my neighbor Dan approached, shaking his head. "She's done this before," he said. "Anyone who crosses her ends up drowning in fines and violations. It's how she keeps people in line." "I'm not going to let her bully me," I replied. "This is my home. She has no right to dictate how I live." Dan looked doubtful. "I admire your courage, but be careful. Karen has connections, even with the city council. She'll do whatever it takes to win." Later that evening, I discovered just how far Karen was willing to go. Returning from work, I found my pool completely drained. The once crystal clear water was gone, leaving only a stark, empty shell. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, whispering among themselves. In the midst of it all stood Karen, her arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. "What the hell did you do?" I demanded, storming up to her. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she replied. "The pool was a safety hazard. The homeowner association had every right to address it." Before I could respond, flashing blue lights illuminated the scene. A police car pulled up and an officer stepped out. Karen wasted no time. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she said, feigning concern. "This man's pool is illegal, and he's been threatening me." My jaw dropped. "Threatening you? This is my property, and you're the one trespassing." The officer looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Let's all calm down," he said. "I'll need to see some proof of ownership and any relevant documentation." As I retrieved my papers, Karen's smirk grew wider. It was clear she thought she'd won. But I wasn't about to give up. This was just the beginning of the battle, and I was determined to expose her for the tyrant she was. The tension from the previous night still hung thick in the air as I stepped out onto my back porch. The sight of my empty pool, its cracked bottom glaring in the sunlight, served as a grim reminder of how far Karen was willing to go. But if she thought this would break me, she was sorely mistaken. My first call of the day was to a lawyer. I needed legal counsel, someone who could help me navigate the maze of homeowner association bylaws and counter Karen's attempts to bully me out of my rights. The lawyer I found, an older man named Mr. Holden, listened patiently as I explained the situation. Draining your pool without permission is a clear violation of property right, he said, his voice steady. But proving it's the homeowner association and not an act of vandalism may be tricky. Do you have any evidence linking them directly to the act? I hesitated. I didn't have video footage or a witness. But Karen's smug demeanor and the timing of her actions were too convenient to ignore. It's her word against mine, he admitted, but I'm sure she's behind it. She even called the police, trying to frame me as a threat. Mr. Holden nodded. We'll need to gather more evidence. Start documenting everything. Photos, letters, notices, anything that might support your case. And if you can install cameras around your property, do so immediately. The more proof you have, the better. After hanging up, I wasted no time. I went to the hardware store and purchased several security cameras. By the evening, my house was a fortress of surveillance. If Karen or her cronies tried anything else, I'd be ready. As I adjusted the final camera, my neighbor Dan appeared, holding a thermos of coffee. Looks like you're preparing for war, he said, half joking. Karen drained my pool, I replied bluntly, and I'm not letting her get away with it. Dan shook his head. She's gone too far this time. Listen, Alex, I've been dealing with her nonsense for years. The fines, the threats. It's like she thinks she owns this neighborhood, but no one's had the guts to stand up to her. Until now. I studied Dan for a moment. He looked tired, worn down by years of Karen's reign, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes that mirrored my own. If you're serious about fighting her, you're going to need allies, he continued. There are others in the neighborhood who've had enough. We just need to rally them. I'm in, I said without hesitation. A week later, Dan and I hosted a secret meeting in my garage. The attendees were a mix of neighbors, all with their own stories of Karen's overreach. There was Mrs. Jacobs, an elderly widow, fined for having a wreath on her door that didn't match community standards. And the Smiths, who'd been forced to remove their child's treehouse under threat of legal action. Karen's been getting away with this for too long, I said, addressing the group. But she's not invincible. We have rights, and it's time we stand up for them. The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. For the first time, I felt hope, a sense that we weren't powerless. Together, we began brainstorming ways to fight back. We decided to pool our resources to hire Mr. Holden as a collective legal representative. We also planned to gather evidence of Karen's abuses, from photos to written testimonies. Our resistance didn't go unnoticed. Within days, Karen escalated her tactics. Fines began arriving at our homes for the most ridiculous reasons: failure to maintain lawn edges, unauthorized porch furniture, and even excessive noise from children playing outside. One morning, I woke to find my driveway blocked by an orange construction barrier. A note from the homeowner association claimed it was due to necessary maintenance, but no work crews appeared. It was an obvious attempt to inconvenience me. When I confronted Karen about it at her office, she barely looked up from her desk. You seem to think you're above the rule, she said, her tone icy. This is a reminder that the homeowner association's authority is absolute. Your authority ends where my property begins, I retorted, and I'll prove it. Karen's smile was almost predatory. Good luck with that, Alex. Later that week, Dan called me over to his house. You're not going to believe this, he said, leading me to his basement. On a table lay a stack of documents, all bearing the homeowner association's letterhead. Where did you get these? I asked, thumbing through the papers. Karen's assistant left them at the copy shop I work at, Dan explained. She thought they were printing invoices, but I saw something else. The documents detailed a series of under-the-table agreements between Karen and a local developer. She had been using the homeowner association's funds to push certain residents out, paving the way for new construction projects. My name was on the list of targeted homeowners. My blood boiled. This wasn't just about enforcing rules. Karen was orchestrating a scheme to profit at the expense of the community. I knew then that exposing her corruption wasn't just about protecting my property, it was about justice. With the evidence in hand, our group devised a plan. We would present the documents at the next homeowner association meeting, ensuring as many residents as possible were present. Karen thrived on secrecy and intimidation, but in the light of public scrutiny, her power would crumble. As the meeting approached, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. This was our chance to take a stand, to show Karen and her enablers that we weren't afraid. Little did I know, the events of that night would push the conflict to a breaking point. The night of the homeowner association meeting had arrived, and the air buzzed with tension. Our group, now calling itself the Maple Ridge Homeowners Alliance, had prepared meticulously. Armed with the documents Dan had uncovered, we were ready to confront Karen publicly. Still, doubt gnawed at me. Would the community rally behind us, or would Karen's fear tactics prevail? The meeting room was packed. Karen, seated at the head of the table, exuded her usual air of smug authority. "Let's begin," she announced, tapping her gavel. The agenda was filled with mundane topics, street repairs, landscaping budgets, but we knew the real battle would come under community concerns. When the floor opened for comments, I stood. My heart raced, but I forced myself to speak with confidence. "I have serious concerns about the actions of this association," I began, holding up the incriminating documents. "Karen has been using her position to push homeowners out and profit from deals with developers." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Karen's composure faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "This is absurd," she said with a dismissive wave. "These accusations are baseless and defamatory." I handed copies of the documents to the attendees. "See for yourselves," I urged. "These records show payments made to Karen from developers, along with plans to replace existing homes with new construction. Several families here tonight are on her list of targets." The crowd's mood shifted. Faces turned from Karen to one another, disbelief giving way to anger. A neighbor stood clutching the papers. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice trembling with rage. Karen's mask of control began to crack. "These are fabricated," she insisted, "a pathetic attempt to undermine my leadership." "If they're fake," I shot back, "then explain why they were found at your assistant's workplace." The room erupted again, and this time Karen had no immediate answer. Her loyal supporters looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as the weight of the evidence pressed down on them. Karen wasn't about to go down without a fight. "I will not stand for this circus," she snapped, standing abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned until further notice." She stormed out, leaving the room in chaos. Despite Karen's retreat, the damage had been done. Neighbors formed small groups, whispering about the revelations. Dan and I used the opportunity to rally support, encouraging others to join our alliance. Over the next few days, Karen's retaliation was swift and ruthless. New fines appeared on our properties, citing absurd violations. My mailbox was unapproved, Dan's fence was out of regulation, and even Mrs. Jacobs' rose bushes were suddenly a problem. Karen was clearly trying to intimidate us into submission. But we were ready. We filed formal complaints with the city council, attaching copies of the evidence. Local media caught wind of the story, and soon reporters were knocking on doors, seeking interviews. Karen's carefully constructed image as a community leader began to crumble under scrutiny. As public pressure mounted, Karen called an emergency meeting. It was a desperate attempt to regain control, but our alliance saw it as an opportunity. We arrived early, filling the front rows with allies and supporters. Karen entered the room flanked by her remaining loyalists. Her usual confidence was absent, replaced by a defensive, almost frantic energy. "I have called this meeting to address the baseless accusations being spread," she began, her voice strained. I stood again, this time with more confidence. "The community deserves the truth, Karen. If these accusations are baseless, then why are you refusing to allow an independent audit of the homeowner association's finances?" The crowd murmured in agreement. Karen hesitated, then launched into a rambling defense about protecting privacy and maintaining order. But her words rang hollow. The tide had turned. Midway through the meeting, a city council representative entered the room. The murmurs stopped as he approached the front. "We've received numerous complaints about this association's practices," he announced. "Effective immediately, an independent review will be conducted. All operations of the homeowner association will be temporarily suspended." The room erupted in cheers. Karen's face went pale and she stumbled back into her chair. For the first time, she looked truly defeated. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors approached me with thanks and offers of support. For the first time in months, I felt hope. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen was cornered, but a cornered animal is dangerous. We'd won this battle, but the war for Maple Ridge was far from finished. The suspension of the homeowner association's operations felt like a small victory, but Karen was far from finished. Her network of loyalists began working behind the scenes, spreading rumors and attempting to discredit me. Flyers appeared in mailboxes accusing me of endangering the community and undermining safety. It was a desperate move, but one that stirred unrest among some residents. Dan and I doubled our efforts, reaching out to those who were still on the fence. We organized neighborhood gatherings, presenting the evidence against Karen and emphasizing the importance of transparency and fairness. Slowly, more people joined our cause, and the Maple Ridge Homeowners Alliance grew stronger. Karen's next move was a calculated strike. I received a summons to appear in court, accusing me of defamation and harassment. The documents were filled with exaggerated claims, including accusations that I had vandalized homeowner association property and made threats against Karen. The lawsuit was a clear attempt to drain my resources and intimidate me into silence. When I met with Mr. Holden, he reviewed the claims with a frown. "This is classic Karen," he said. "She's banking on you backing down. But with the evidence we have, we can turn this against her." We filed a countersuit, accusing Karen of abuse of power, property damage, and harassment. The legal battle was shaping up to be a high-stakes showdown, one that would determine the future of the neighborhood. As we prepared for the upcoming court date, an unexpected visitor knocked on my door. It was Karen's former assistant, Claire. She looked nervous but determined. "I can't work for her anymore," Claire said, handing me a flash drive. "This has everything you need. Financial records, emails, even recordings of meetings. She's been manipulating the system for years." I couldn't believe it. "Why are you helping us now?" I asked. Claire hesitated. "I've seen what she's done to you and others. It's wrong. And honestly, I'm scared. She'll come after me if she finds out I've defected." "You're doing the right thing," I assured her. "We'll make sure you're protected." The flash drive was a goldmine. It contained detailed records of Karen's schemes, including the illegal use of homeowner association funds and proof of her connections with developers. With this new evidence, our case against her grew even stronger. The day of the court hearing was tense. Karen arrived with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who exuded confidence. But as the proceedings began, it became clear that Karen's case was built on weak foundations. Mr. Holden presented our evidence methodically, dismantling Karen's accusations piece by piece. He introduced the financial records, emails, and even played a recording where Karen openly discussed her plans to push certain residents out. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge's expression grew increasingly stern. Karen's lawyer attempted to dismiss the evidence, claiming it was obtained unlawfully, but Claire's testimony as a whistleblower sealed the deal. She detailed how Karen had coerced her into falsifying documents and using homeowner association resources for personal gain. When it was Karen's turn to testify, her composure finally cracked. Under cross-examination, she struggled to justify her actions, stumbling over her words and contradicting herself. By the end of the day, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that Karen's reign of terror was over. The judge ruled in our favor, dismissing Karen's lawsuit and ordering an independent audit of the homeowner association. Karen was removed from her position, and the court mandated that she repay the funds she had embezzled. The neighborhood erupted in celebration as the news spread, but the victory was bittersweet. Karen's actions had left a deep divide in the community, one that would take time to heal. Many residents felt betrayed, while others were reluctant to trust the new leadership of the Homeowners Alliance. As I stood in my backyard that evening, gazing at the empty pool, I felt a mix of relief and determination. This battle had been won, but the fight for fairness and transparency wasn't over. Karen may have been dethroned, but the scars of her tyranny remained. Over the next few months, the Maple Ridge Homeowners Alliance worked tirelessly to rebuild trust within the community. We implemented new bylaws that emphasize accountability and fairness, ensuring that no single individual could wield unchecked power again. Karen left the neighborhood shortly after the trial, her reputation in tatters. Some said she moved to a new town, eager to start over. Others whispered that she'd joined another homeowner association, unable to relinquish her thirst for control. But for us, her departure marked the beginning of a new chapter. With the support of my neighbors, I finally began restoring my property. The pool was repaired and refilled, becoming a symbol of resilience and community. On the day of its reopening, families gathered in my backyard, laughing and splashing in the water. For the first time in months, Maple Ridge felt like home again. Months had passed since Karen's removal, but her shadow still loomed over Maple Ridge. The community had made progress in healing, yet remnants of her influence lingered. Some of her most loyal supporters continued to resist the changes brought by the Maple Ridge Homeowners Alliance, creating friction during our rebuilding efforts. Despite the challenges, we pressed on. Our new leadership emphasized transparency, holding open meetings and inviting every resident to participate. Trust was slowly being restored, but a sense of unease remained. Karen's departure had been abrupt, and rumors swirled about her next move. Had she truly left, or was she planning a comeback? The answer came one quiet afternoon when I received an envelope marked with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing Karen's unmistakable handwriting. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. Maple Ridge will always be mine." The threat was vague, but it was enough to reignite old fears. I shared the note with Dan and the rest of the Alliance, who all agreed that we needed to be vigilant. Claire, who had become a trusted ally since her whistleblowing, suggested we tighten security and keep a close eye on neighborhood activities. Within days, strange occurrences began. Security cameras captured unfamiliar cars idling near homes. Anonymous complaints flooded city offices, targeting Alliance members with petty accusations. And then came the most chilling discovery: a drone hovering over my backyard, its camera trained on my house. Determined to uncover the truth, I reached out to a tech-savvy neighbor, Jake, who offered to analyze the drone footage. His findings were shocking. The drone signal traced back to a nearby property, a vacant house recently purchased under an LLC. Further investigation revealed that the LLC was linked to Karen. It was clear Karen hadn't left. She'd been operating from the shadows, using her resources to undermine the Alliance and sow discord in the community. With this evidence in hand, we contacted local authorities, but without concrete proof of illegal activity, their hands were tied. "If the law won't stop her, we'll have to," I told the Alliance during an emergency meeting. "We need to expose her before she causes more damage." Our plan was simple but risky. Using the information Jake had gathered, we set up a decoy operation to draw Karen out. Claire volunteered to act as bait, pretending to defect back to Karen's side. She reached out to Karen under the guise of wanting to help her regain control of the neighborhood. Karen took the bait. Over the next few weeks, Claire recorded their conversations, where Karen revealed her plans to manipulate city officials, sabotage community projects, and even use legal loopholes to reclaim her position in the homeowner association. The recordings were damning, capturing Karen's voice admitting to actions that bordered on criminal. Armed with this new evidence, we organized a town hall meeting, inviting residents, local media, and city representatives. The turnout was overwhelming, with the room packed to capacity. Karen didn't attend, but we knew she was watching. Dan opened the meeting, recounting the struggles the community had faced under Karen's rule. Then, Claire played the recordings. Gasps echoed through the room as Karen's voice detailed her schemes. The media captured every moment, ensuring her actions would be exposed beyond Maple Ridge. By the end of the meeting, the community's resolve was stronger than ever. Residents who had once been loyal to Karen expressed their regret, pledging their support to the Alliance. The city council, pressured by the public outcry, launched a formal investigation into Karen's activities. Karen's downfall was swift and decisive. The investigation uncovered additional evidence of fraud and embezzlement, leading to criminal charges. Her assets were frozen, and she was barred from participating in any community leadership roles. Maple Ridge had finally rid itself of her toxic influence. With Karen gone, the Alliance focused on rebuilding. The neighborhood began to thrive, with new projects and events bringing residents closer together. My pool, once a symbol of conflict, became a gathering place for families and friends, a reminder of what we'd overcome. As I sat by the pool one evening, watching the sun set over Maple Ridge, I reflected on everything that had happened. The battle against Karen had been exhausting and at times disheartening, but it had also brought out the best in our community. Together, we had faced a tyrant and reclaimed our neighborhood. Karen's threat had been real, but so was our resilience. Maple Ridge wasn't just a collection of houses. It was a home, a place worth fighting for. And we had proven that no one, not even someone as ruthless as Karen, could take that away from us.